Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Geo-Institute live stream. We have a very special treat for you today. First of all, it's our first live stream in this year's Geo-Institute Summer of Live, where we will be bringing you all kinds of amazing content right on your screen. We have a GeoPeer live series coming up. We have, of course, our Cross USA lectures over the summer with Richard Bathurst, this year's lecturer. We'll have GeoStrata Extra as we usually do, and yes, there will be more than that, as there always is. My name is Brad Keeler. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and we are really excited to have you here today for the 25th episode of our Geo-Legends video series. This one, though, has a couple of distinctions. It's the first one that we've ever tried to do live in a live stream like this. And it's also the first one where the legend hasn't been present with us. That, of course, is because we are celebrating the late, great Ralph Peck today with some esteemed panelists in what is going to be an amazing discussion. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, of course, not while you're watching this, but after you're watching this, you can head over to geoinstitute.org and find out all kinds of amazing things about us, including that we're a technical society, with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. And of course, if you like what you see today, and I always feel very strongly that you will, you should click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we'll let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. One final note before we kick over to the big show today is that yes, you can get your very own Ralph Peck bobblehead. If you are so inclined, you can have it on your shelf. Mary's got a copy of the real book handy that you're gonna see in a moment, but he is, of course, I don't know how close we can get with that. We went into a lot of detail on these things. $96 or more contribution to GI student programs, and you will have a Ralph Peck bobblehead in your very own home. So you can support students and have a very cool mementos showing one of the greats in the field. Now, GeoStrata editor, but GI interviewer extraordinaire, Mary Nodine, is gonna tell you who you're gonna hear from today, tell you a little bit more about the panel, and help you have a great time this afternoon. I think that's the most important part. Mary, are you up for the challenge?
Absolutely, Brad. And I love this Summer of Live thing. I'm just imagining all the Geo-Institute members watching their YouTube channel on the beach, by the pool. So yeah, hopefully someone's in the sunshine today. Welcome to the 25th episode of the Geo-Institute's Geo-Legend Live series. So as Brad said, this episode is special because we're going to learn about one of the most important legends in our field, the great Ralph Peck. But also this is unique because, of course, we don't have Ralph Peck to talk to. And instead, we have 4 other Geo-Institute members who are going to tell us firsthand about Ralph Peck and his life, his personality, and his legacy. Brad worked hard to identify some people who worked with or studied under and or were deeply influenced by Ralph Peck. So we're going to be doing 2 panels focused on Peck. This first one comprises geotechnical engineers who worked closely with Ralph Peck and can speak to what it was like to have him as a colleague and mentor. And we'll be doing a second panel in June with others who can speak to Peck's legacy in the geotechnical field. So I'm going to go around and have everyone introduce himself and talk about their connection to Ralph Peck. But before we do that, I'm going to share my screen and show this lovely photo, which is my connection to Ralph Peck, which is that in 2007, I got to meet him and he graciously stood up out of his wheelchair and connected with some of the UT and A&M students at, I think it was a GeoCongress in Denver. So that was wonderful, special experience, but unfortunately I didn't have further interaction with Ralph Peck than that. So we'll go around and I'm gonna let everyone introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Tim Stark.
Hi, I'm Tim Stark, a professor of civil engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
And can you just Without giving away details right now, can you just briefly say kind of how you knew Ralph Peck and what your connection was with him? Like, why are you on this panel?
Well, I joined Illinois in 1991, and Professor Peck was coming back to campus every semester, and I interacted with him personally and on various research projects.
Awesome. Gabe Fernandez, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Gabe Fernandez. I'm a former faculty member from the University of Illinois, Civil Engineering Department. I'm retired. And my relationship with Dr. Peck started early on when I came as a student here, as a graduate student. He was a professor of dams and case histories. And after he retired, after, things progressed and I got my PhD and I became part of the faculty, Ralph retired and I took over his two classes. I taught the dam class and I taught the case history class for 25 years. It was a great experience. And in the intermediate, we obviously interacted and during this process of the transition, he was leaving and I was taking over his class. And it was great. It was a great synergy with Ralph, and I'm very proud of this, endeavor. Thank you.
Yeah, you had big shoes to fill. Did he share with you his notes and the structures of his courses so that you were kind of able to carry that on directly?
I didn't hear you well.
Did he share with you his notes? Like, were you able to kind of use his materials to teach those courses going forward?
Yeah, some of it, but the most, honestly, the thing that I learned from Ralph better was his way of thinking, his approach to the problems, his attention for detail. It was more like the philosophy of how approach. He wasn't when Ralph lectured, he didn't put not too many formulas in the blackboard. It was concept. It's an approach of how you tackle engineering projects. The case history class was a superb class of teaching you how to think, how to approach the problems and how to analyze them and process. That was the best. And he was a great teacher, very clear. He had very clear concepts. But it was more of the structure, how you approach the problem, how you think, more than, mathematical formulas or anything like that. That's great. His judgment, is trying to teach people some judgment, which is key. And it has been the tradition of Illinois for many years.
Yeah, that's great. And I definitely want to dive into that more in the interview, the idea of his thoughts on engineering judgment. Bob Gilbert, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Bob Gilbert. I'm the chair of Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin right now. And I was an undergraduate student in the 1980s and then a graduate student in the early 1990s when Dr. Peck would come back and give seminars once a semester. So I attended many of those seminars.
Great. Suzanne Lacasse, last but not least.
Hello, everyone. I am from NGI. I still work at NGI. And I guess I did not study at University of Illinois, but one of my professors at the École Polytechnique in Montreal was a student of Ralph Peck, Yves Lacroix, and who was an Illinois graduate. And I met Ralph in 1972 as I was finishing my master's degree at MIT. He remained a friend for the rest of his life, but I guess most importantly for us in Norway is that in year 1998, Ralph Peck donated his documents to NGI, and then we established the Peck Library, which we're very proud of.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I actually had the good fortune to visit NGI when I was on vacation in Norway last summer, because I was connected to Sean Salazar thanks to GeoStrata, and he gave me a tour. But unfortunately, you guys are in a different, you're like on a temporary campus. I was so disappointed I didn't get to actually see the real libraries when I was there. So someday I'll have to go back.
Well, next year it will be back in place.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'm going to dive into the questions. I'm going to direct questions at a specific person, but I encourage everyone to kind of chime in and have this be a conversation. So if you have some
I can call you later.
some feedback on a specific question or topic, please just jump in and say what you'd like to say. And of course, those in the audience, if you're listening and you have questions or comments, please type them into the chat in YouTube, and Brad will make sure that they get over to me, and we'll make sure to address your questions because we want this to be as interactive as possible. So the first one I'm going to ask you, Gabe, and this is kind of related to what you were just saying with regard to Ralph Peck and his approach. So he seems to, from what I've read, he seems to have had a very practical focus when it came to his work. I'll try to speak up because it seems like you can't hear me perfectly. It seems like he had a practical approach when it came to his work, thing where he was applying theory to real projects. He had a case history course. He spoke of visiting project sites, every project site without exception. So how did this approach influence his colleagues and students and contribute in a unique way to the geotechnical field?
Well, I would say that Ralph's approach emphasized the synergy between theory and practice. And also, he brought another element that was very important, that was the significance of precedent. Civil engineering is not a science. Civil engineering is an empirical discipline. We deal with nature. So the precedent of what kind of problems have developed, how those problems have been solved, is fundamental for engineers to learn. And also to build on that with the new techniques we have more modern ways of analyze computers and so on to integrate that. But basically, we are in a science that is empirical. We're dealing with geology. And Ralph integrated very well two things: geology, which is fundamental, because that's the scenario where we do things, and precedent, how the problems were solved, and how they behave. Learning from precedent was key. So his case history class was that, just to show, case histories where he worked personally. He only talked about the case history that he worked on, the problems that they encountered. Some of them were not detected early, and how did they react, how they adjusted, the need of engineers to be flexible. So to me, that's symbiosis between fundamentals and practical present is key to the approach that he proposed, or that he used and he taught it. So that's kind of a short summary of the philosophy that I learned from Ralph. The other thing that I want to say is he was an excellent speaker, calm, deliberate, precise, and very patient. So we were very lucky to participate and share, because he not only taught specific information, he taught us how to think, how to approach these problems, how to tackle the problem, which is fundamental in engineering. So that's kind of a summary of, to respond to your question.
No, that sounds amazing. I wish I had been able to hear him speak, but I know that he influenced a lot of other people. Bob, do you have any other thoughts along those lines from seeing his lectures that you were able to see as a student?
Let me tell you something.
He wants to say one more thing.
Just
go ahead.
A little. It was final. When we discuss our case histories, Ralph wanted, our job was to summarize the case history in one page, one typewritten page, saying what do we know, what was the problem, how it was solved. So it taught us to summarize, to go to the fundamental, to the basics. Mm-hmm. And that was a tremendous exercise to learn how to write and communicate your thoughts about a project in one typewritten page. He didn't want any to go to the meat. Not to waste a lot of time with, peripheral descriptions. And that was a tremendous exercise to learn how to transmit your thoughts and tremendous. It was teaching how to think too, and how to pass on your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's he sounds like an amazing communicator all around. Bob, what were your impressions of him as a teacher or lecturer?
Yeah, the thing in addition to what Gabe offered is he was really creative. So he could take a really complicated problem and he could figure out how to turn that into a story. And I think that part of that is how he solved problems. He would create a story that had to do with the geology and the construction and the owner and the personalities that were working on it. But he also then was able to communicate that really well to students because he could tell it as a story. So you didn't, I never remember taking notes in one of his lectures because he told you the story. And what I remember is the story. And from the story, I remember all the important points about that story.
Good point.
Yeah. So, Bob, you noted when you wrote to me about your connection with him, you noted that a lot of what you know was through those, like third hand, also through those that he influenced, such as Roy Olsson, Cording, Mesri. What's an example of a value that you think he passed on through the engineering generations that you would see through not only from your connection with him, but through those other people that he influenced who then influenced you?
Yeah. Well, they were all very bright people. So he was obviously very bright. They were all very practical people.
Yeah.
And understood like what the impact of solving a problem was instead of solving it to solve it for the problem solving sake. But they all had a real healthy skepticism too. They were not going to accept things at face value without really digging into the details. And I think Roy Olsson's maybe the best example of that. But I also spent lots and lots of time with Roy Olsson. So that healthy skepticism, I think was really important because that gets passed on to students who then need to take that out in the real world and always question, is this real and what's important and what's not important? And yeah, some designer came up with something, but is that really going to work? That skepticism was a big part of, I think, his legacy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then, just out of curiosity, did Roy Olsson go to Illinois? Like, what was his connection with Peck?
Oh yeah, Roy got his PhD with Ralph as his supervisor in 1960, and then went on to teach at Illinois, and then in 1970 came to the University of Texas, and I joined here in 1993, so I got to be a colleague with Roy for many years. And the best thing about that was at Illinois, there are all sorts of Roy Olsson stories, and so I got to come to Texas and find out what was true and not true about these Roy Olsson stories from the time at Illinois. And for the most part, there was truth to all of them, but never quite as exaggerated as what you heard at Illinois.
Well, I am very privileged to have my own Roy Olsson story, so I will someday, that'll be a topic of one of these live streams. So let's see, Suzanne, I'm going to go to you now. Ralph Peck worked on many dams with great passion for his whole life, from what I heard, like literally his whole life. And you mentioned one that he worked on in Iceland at the age of 90. I'm wondering if you can tell us what you know about this project and his involvement, and if you want to branch off into any other projects that he was particularly passionate about, you're welcome to. But I know that's a very broad question.
Well, it was the dam called Karanjukar, Iceland name, and it's a concrete face rockfill dam, nearly 200-meter high and 800-meter long. He was working with NGI at the time, and we together were consultants to for the construction of the dam. But when he got involved, it was for the first filling them, and that's always a very critical aspect of the dam. It was amazing. Ralph Peck was 90 years old, and those of you who knew him know that he had scoliosis, so his back was bent or curved, and he was not running, but he was walking on the dam just like a teenager, so excited about the novelty because it was such a large dam. And he was passionate at the dam, even at the age of 90. And throughout his life, what I learned from him when you were a consultant is to write short reports and with a logical table of content and easy to understand reasonings. And then to be diplomatic, something I'm still working on, I guess. But it was amazing to see a man of that age still so enthusiastic about being in the field, and then after that writing a report.
That's amazing. I feel like everybody who lives to that age has something that it just like keeps them going. And for him, it seems like it was, geotechnical engineering and dams. But that's incredible.
But especially dams. He was very, very passionate about dams.
Yeah. Are there any other projects that stand out that you think were sort of his favorites or ones that were highlights of his career?
Well, that we have in the library, Ralph Peck had 1,010 consulting projects.
Wow.
And so he worked many things, many countries, many aspects. It's not just dams, but I remember that he was particularly proud of the Antirion Bridge, which he got an Opal Award from ASCE a bit late in his life. He was also, Ralph Peck was born in Winnipeg, Canada, but did not live there very long. But he was very proud of all these Canadian projects. And they were all very big projects. It started with the Bennett Dam, I think. And then it was the James Bay project, a very large project up north in Churchill Fall. And I think especially Lower Notch, which had an enormous gorge, which the dam had to be designed for. But again, there's a few I chose among the 1,010 projects.
Yeah, it's hard to pick a few highlights, I guess. But no, that's great. All right, I'm going to go to Tim because I had the privilege of reviewing an article. You have a special connection to Ralph Peck that is pretty unique. And I had the privilege of reviewing the article you wrote for the future GeoStrata issue about living in Ralph Peck's house in Urbana in the 1990s. It was really a delightful read, and I don't want to give away a lot of the details, but just to pick one anecdote, can you give the viewers a high-level background, sort of a teaser of the story, and then maybe just tell about the experience that you had when you and your wife wanted to remodel the kitchen?
Okay, high level. We looked at a number of houses in this area just adjacent to campus called the State Street area, and Bob and Gabe probably are familiar with it. And all the houses were in just disrepair. And then one Saturday morning, we got a call and said, look, you ought to come take a look at this house. It's not on the market. It's a political science professor that's moving. Oh, geez, another fixer-upper. Well, we got to the house. My wife's a structural engineer, so we kind of looked at different things, but very quickly we knew that this house was just incredibly built, incredible. And so I asked the owner who built the house, did he know who designed it? And he said, a concrete engineer named Peck. And I said, Ralph Peck? Oh, I don't know. So he took me to the dining room and he went through a bunch of files and pulled out the original blue line drawings of the house with R.B. Peck signed on the title block. And so we bought the house right there. So your question is, what's something unique about the house? There's a lot, and you'll see that in the article. But if I can pick one, it's the basement. So first, it had a full basement, which many of the houses didn't in that area because of groundwater problems. In addition to having a full basement, it was dry, and it was like amazing. Dry basement in Urbana. And Gabe, you can probably relate to that. And so Peck toured the house with me after I told him that we bought it, and he was very excited about it. And so he came over and walked me around the house and told me things about the house. And one of us, so Professor Peck, how did you make the basement dry? It's great. We had the kids' playroom. We had carpet in the basement. It was so dry. We were convinced it was dry. The basement was carpeted, unheard of in Urbana. He said, well, Tim, and I said, I know the walls are poured, concrete, not blocked. He said, yeah, but Tim, do you know how thick the wall is? I don't know, 18 inches. 18-inch thick poured concrete basement wall. And so I said, why did you make it so thick? Well, for groundwater, but also I could take failed sections from the crane bay in Newmark Civil Engineering Lab and put it as reinforcement in the wall. So the wall is just incredible. So anyways, that's one. And we lived there for like 8 or 9 years. And my wife wanted to open the kitchen up. There was a little partition wall between the kitchen and the dining area. And so I took the plans in during one of Peck's visits to campus. I said, Professor Peck, my wife wants to knock out this wall, not me. It's my wife's idea, not mine. And which was a good move because he was kind of attached to that wall, as you'll see in the article. But anyways, going past that, he said, well, after a long discussion, it's not a load-bearing wall. So it's probably possible, but it's going to be well constructed. And the contractor found how well constructed it was. It took major effort to knock down this little partition between the kitchen and the dining room. Metal lath, very aggressive metal lath in the concrete plaster wall. So incredible construction and design. And that got to one of Gabe's points earlier about theory to practice and theory and practice. So all the structural engineering was there, but then he added a lot of practical aspects to the house that made it just fantastic. But Mary, I wanted to comment, Gabe and Bob also mentioned how great of a speaker Professor Peck was. And I agree with all their statements. One other amazing thing about when he gave a lecture, he'd speak for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And during that entire time, he never said the word or he never said, or may. Every word was completely measured. No distractions, no, no, every word. And so I remember that every time I give a lecture, I try to never say or anything like that. So really important.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a hard thing to teach people.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to actually live up to. But wait, I just have one more question about the house. It was passed along to it was passed along. So look at me, I'm saying so it was passed along to a civil engineer's granddaughter. After that, have you had any success keeping it in geotechnical engineering family?
Well, that's a long story. Professor Peck thought it would be great if we could keep it in the geotech family. We had to move because we unexpectedly needed an extra bedroom. And I met with him after the remodel and said, what about putting an addition on the back of the house and knocking a hole through the load-bearing wall? And he didn't think that was advisable at all. He just, you will not knock a hole in that wall. So we had to move. We only moved 2 blocks away, same neighborhood. And he realized it would be hard to find a geotechnical engineer to own the house. So he said to me, again, straight, no, it would be nice if it stayed in civil engineering. That's okay. Without saying that was a directive. Anyways, young in my career, I pretty much thought it was pretty close to a directive. So we held on to the house for a while, and amazingly, the granddaughter of Daniel Meade, who was the 43rd president of ASCE, a former ASCE president. And so next visit, I mentioned that they were interested in the house, and he said, that would be nice. And so we did eventually end up selling the house to them.
But then after that, it was just a free-for-all?
So they moved 1 block over because they needed an extra bedroom. And I advised them not to try to put an addition on the back of the house. And so it did transfer again, and they're not a civil engineer, but a professor at the university in a non-engineering field.
Yeah, I feel like if I was a new professor at Illinois and was told, yeah, you have to come here. If you come here, you have to buy Ralph Peck's house. I'd be like, okay. Well, but it all depends on who's moving out at what time.
Yeah, no one knew that. And I didn't know it was Peck's house when we went to look at it. And I'm sure Gabe probably knew at that time, but I sure didn't. And it just
do people know now? Do all the students know where Ralph Peck's house is and how they will after reading GeoStrata?
Well, they will. I think some of mine. I don't know, Bob. Did you know I was living in Ralph Peck's house? I can't remember if we talked about that.
I remember that, yeah, but I didn't. If you asked me where it is, I couldn't tell you where it is.
Okay.
All right, it's under the radar. Okay. I'll stop being hung up on that. But that was just no more details, but that was just such a fascinating story. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know who the best person to ask this to. I'll try Gabe. From reading writings by Ralph Peck and things that others wrote of him, it seems that he had a really thoughtful take on engineering judgment and what it was and its importance and how to develop it. Can you explain his take on engineering judgment, and others are welcome to chime in, and how that influenced your own perspective?
Sure. One thing that I want to tell you, in all the classes that I took with Ralph and many interactions, he really didn't write too many equations. He was on the blackboard. He was more interested in the overall approach, very clearly establish the steps, do a good investigation for your site, whatever, dam or a house, or make sure that you understand the geology. The geology was clear for Ralph. He, Ralph was a structural engineer by training. So just think how, his mind was all encompassing. So he emphasized study the geology. The geology is key for dams, for large infrastructure. Then based on that understanding of the geology, plan your investigation, your boreholes. Don't go and start drilling boreholes there at, just because I need 5 here and 3. No, each borehole has a purpose. You want to find out something, you want to confirm something, you should have in your mind an idea of the geological setup, and you go to confirm and to learn a little bit more. But you have to have a picture in your mind when you start your exploration program. That was clear for him. You may find surprises, and then you can, increase your boreholes or your shear wave velocity measurements. But for Ralph, having a good understanding of the site, the geology, was key. Then the next step is imagine your dam and think, what are the potential modes of failure here? What could happen? Maybe I have a foundation that is susceptible to erosion, or maybe we have fractured rock that could, let a lot of water go through. And so it was an approach of understanding behavior. I never saw Ralph putting an equation on the blackboard. It was concepts. Think about the framework. And once you have a picture, confirm that framework. And then think of the mode of failure, which was once you assess the mode of failure, definitely you are way ahead. Chances of failure are, very, very minimal. The problems develop when you don't anticipate a mode of failure. That's most of the case. So I thought about it. Maybe one time he wrote an equation, but it was very, very, not, occasionally. It was more concepts, approach, and process of how to attack the problem. Number one. The other one that they insisted and emphasized was learn the precedent. Go and study the precedent. Study how failures took place. Skip Hendren and I spent a month in Bayonne in Italy 40 years ago, going up and down the mountains there and figuring out, studying Bayonne was a very critical case, a dam in Italy, 1964, that the slopes, the flanks of the dam, it was an arch dam, a concrete arch dam, designed by Carlos Emenza, the top engineer. It was an arch dam, concrete. And when they start filling up the dam, one of the flanks, the mountain came down, produced a wave that overtopped the dam 100 meters and annihilated a town downstream with 3,000 people. And that was the catastrophe. We studied that case a lot. And I always thought about Ralph. It's the go and look at the geology very, very carefully and explore it. And then develop your potential modes of failure and go on that. But it was conceptual. It was not writing, like I said, equations no. It was the big picture. The big picture in a coordinated way. Geology, exploration, anticipate the modes of failure, and then design to preclude those modes of failure. Now, how do we do the design? Think of the present. What have people done before? We don't have to invent new things. It could be creative. But that was kind of the philosophy. And I always thought about it. I mean, it was more the thinking process that an engineering project requires and the steps. And Ralph was a structural engineer, but he was very keen on the significance of geology. He emphasized that very much. And he learned that from Terzaghi too. I think his association with Terzaghi was key to develop his perception of engineering. Because, Terzaghi was had been building dams in Turkey 20 years before Peck got his degree. So, and that was I think Terzaghi was a very strong influence on Peck's thinking approach. He developed his own, obviously.
But it sounds a little bit like where Terzaghi was developing a lot of these technical concepts. Peck did a lot to kind of bring it into the down to earth, kind of bring it to a practical sense and help people to use it, which is really important and powerful. So,
yeah, and the observation. Also, the study of the president, and Ralph in his case history class, because he had a class, case histories, he taught a class where he chose maybe 6 or 7 case histories that I taught subsequently, and I think Tim is teaching that class. And it was a process of teaching, not teaching information, teaching the students how to think, how to approach the problem. What are the steps that you have to follow? How do you develop the potential modes of failures? How do you maybe do your exploration to see if those potential modes of failure may be possible or not? How do you design the instrumentation of the dam to detect early and anticipate impending signs of distress? So it was, when I reminisce, it was at that time I wasn't conscious of how significant it was.
Right.
But as you mature with age, you realize how lucky we were to get that. And the thing is, even if you didn't detect the significance at that time, the concepts remain there. And as you face reality, they come back and they make more sense, much more sense. And you enrich yourself as an engineer. Ralph was an example not only for as an engineer, but as a person, as an individual, very calm, very calm. I saw him in different, interaction with people, very calm, very polite, always. He kept his, cool and his mind thinking of the process. He was an example as a person also, not only as an engineer.
Suzanne, do you want to? Yeah, that's, thank you for that. Suzanne, I think others maybe want to build on that. So Suzanne, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, I wanted to mention when Gabriel mentioned Ralph Peck bringing things in practice. The observational method, for which Ralph Peck is very well known because it was a topic of his Rankine lecture in 1969. If you read the literature, it's Terzaghi who first talked about it in 1925 in a maybe kind of convoluted way. And it just remained there. And then, as you know, Peck and Terzaghi work very closely. But it's Ralph Peck that really brought the method into practice with his lecture, and also some papers a bit before the Rankine lecture in 69. But that's the perfect example. You had Carl Terzaghi, who was a great thinker, and all that, but did not really brought in the way that a mentor would do it to teach the rest of the profession how to apply the observational method. And Ralph Peck did that. And so that was just an example to confirm what Gabriel was saying.
And you just want to say, Ralph also was a very kind person. I mean, he was very, very even, you notice probably some of our questions annoyed him or something when we were students, but you never saw that. He was very even, very kind, always pay attention, make you feel like you were the most interesting guy, when you were talking to him. So that was the other thing. He had a personality that was very attractive, so engaging.
Bob, did you have something you wanted to add to that topic?
Yeah, one of my favorite Ralph Peck stories, and I've got people on this meeting who can maybe call me on it because I don't know the details if I have them right. But he was hired as a consultant later in his career for an older building downtown Chicago, maybe the Auditorium Theater, which is got a shallow foundation in downtown Chicago, and they were worried about settlement and worried about distortion in the building. And they brought the great Dr. Peck up to consult on this, and they toured the building with him, and then they were sitting having lunch with him, and they asked Dr. Peck what he thought, and he asked them, well, when did these problems that you're describing show up? And they said, well, a year ago or so, we had painted the walls in the lobby this dark green color, and then we started noticing all these cracks. And he said, I see. And they said, well, Dr. Peck, what do you think? And they were very much expecting he was going to suggest some kind of an elaborate underpinning to keep this building from settling anymore. And he said, well, I think you just need to paint the walls white again. And that to me was Dr. Peck.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the story is exactly right, and I can't remember whether it's Dr. Peck who told it to me or who told it to me. But
No.
No, it's a great settlement
Very practical
problem, and I use it in all my classes. And yeah, I think it's pretty close. If I didn't know about the green paint though.
Yeah.
All right, Suzanne, I'd like to go to you and just talk a little more. I mean, Gabe touched on Ralph Peck as a person, and I know that you in particular were a close colleague and friend of his for several decades. Can you tell us a little about his personality and his nature with those that he knew well, and what some of your favorite aspects of him as a friend were?
Well, as I was thinking about that question, the first thing I wrote down was Ralph Peck was kind. I've known him for 50 years. And even when I was just a master student, he was kind to me. I guess to elaborate on that, Ralph never had a negative word about anyone. And should someone have some kind of weakness, let's say, or shortcoming, he would find a way to turn it in some sort of quality, in a way of describing it, which maybe was humorous, but he never said something negative. The second aspect, which I think was marvelous with him, was his foresight. In 1987, as he was receiving an honorary PhD, doctor's degree from, I think it was Laval University in Quebec, he talked in his allocution after the doctor's degree about nature-based solution, how to develop geotechnical solutions that would be in accord with nature without destroying nature. And today this is one of the very important research projects in Europe, is how to comfort against landslides with looking at nature-based solutions. What kind of growth you have to place on the slope so that you increase the factor of safety, developing roots and such. And Ralph Peck published that because it's a paper today in 1987. I mean, how could he think about it when nobody else was thinking about it at that time?
Yeah, that's wild. I remember reading something. One of the in my research, one of the things that he wrote, I think in the 70s, was the challenge of balancing. Let's see if I can get it right, because I was going to ask a question about this, but the challenges of balancing, making sure that we're, caring for the environment, but also like getting things actually built, which is like this give and take. And I'm like, we still can't figure that out. And it's like he saw that was going to be a challenge in the coming generations. And I also thought that was really just perceptive. So that's cool.
Another aspect which I was happy for, Ralph Peck lived to a very long age, so maybe he could become, let's say, fixed in his ways, but gradually, and I guess Bob Gilbert would appreciate that, he gradually converted to the benefit, to accepting the benefit of looking at a foundation also in terms of reliability and risk. And that's something he's published some works which he was casting some doubts on the approach. But towards his later years, he saw that there were some possibilities there. And, amazingly, he was very good in statistics. We have a number of papers showing that. Excuse me. And, if you look at the observational approach, the way he does it, you develop a solution and then you look at the worst possible case and then you prepare for that. That has a component of risk analysis as we do it today. And I guess you ask what is a favorite quality. I think, and we've had a few examples of that, his sense of humor. Ralph had a sense of humor. It was subtle, and he had a way of describing things, and it was really very funny. And I think that sense of humor just got better as he grew older. So that's a very positive thing.
Yeah.
I remember one of his lectures was about his dad. His dad was a structural engineer who had designed railroad bridges to help the Transcontinental Railroad. And he gave this lecture, and it was as much about his dad and his admiration and love for his dad as it was about the engineering that his dad had done. And it struck me because I remember walking out of that lecture thinking about my dad, because my dad was an engineer, but at that point in time, I didn't really know at all what he had done. And I suspect because of Ralph's lecture, I started asking my dad more questions about what he had done and what his career was all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. It seems like he was really connected to people, and that's so important. And I'm sure that's probably part of what makes him so memorable and successful. So we're getting close to the end of our hour. I want to encourage people in the live audience to type questions in the chat box if you have anything in particular you want to ask any of the panelists, or something Jenny, general questions you want to ask Ralph Peck. But I would like to go around and kind of ask, just to sort of tie things together, what was the most important lesson either about engineering itself or about how you navigate the world as an engineer that you learned from your time with Ralph Peck? And Tim, I'll start with you.
Gabe mentioned it earlier, and that is boiling the problem down to an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And Professor Peck would say, if you can't reduce a difficult engineering problem to an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, you will probably never understand it. And so, as Gabe described, one page, and you got to get all the information about that, the solution, the problem, the solution, in an 8.5 by 11.
And so do you do that?
Yeah.
All the time with every problem?
Yeah, I try to get it to 8.5 by 11. Or nowadays in a PowerPoint slide,
yep,
I'll have one summary slide.
Yeah, that's great. Bob, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think I learned from him the importance of being practical and of the world of construction. I think he was appreciative that things on a piece of paper are different than what actually gets built. And it was so important to get out in the field. Like Gabe said, you needed to go to a project site. Every single consulting project he worked on, I think he said he actually went and visited the site the very first thing, because understanding the physical problem was so important, and being practical. I also remember he would ask questions that had to do with dimensions and with just understanding the physical world, like how far is it between columns in this classroom, and how fast is the creek outside the door flowing, what's its volumetric flow rate, just questions like that, where there was an appreciation for just the physical sense of the world that you were working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like a lot of engineers could benefit from having that kind of a general grasp, which requires no calculations at all. It's just like a sense for what the scale of numbers mean in different physical contexts. That's great. Thank you. Gabe, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I agree on Tim's and Bob's perception, but I also want to I want to emphasize another aspect. I mean, in addition of his technical capabilities, it was his kindness. He was very kind, and I never, in all these dealings that we had, he was always, making sure that everybody understood everything. He would repeat, and I never saw him losing his temper. Never. He was always very nice, very calm, very professional, and that impressed me too as a man, as an individual. He was very kind and very measured. God, I always saw him as an example of don't lose your temper, think clear, be kind, and because shouting doesn't help. So I want to emphasize that aspect because it's important. It's important, in your dealings with people, and he was unique on that. I observed we were in many, heated discussions and people with different points of views, and the contractor protesting. He always remained nice, calm, and basically that helps to move forward the discussion and solve the problems. I also learned that. That's very key. So just an observation.
Yeah, great. Suzanne, you mentioned in your notes to me that every once in a while he did get mad. Do you have an example of this?
Well, he was the type he was very even-tempered, but he was the type that if he got what we call it took a very long time or accumulation of events to make him blow his fuse get him upset. And when he felt that people were not handled correctly, were not, or maybe discriminated against or something, he would tolerate a number of comments for a while. And then suddenly he would say, "You can't say that. Now you have to take this back." And he was really quite firm when he was saying that. You could see, the way his mouth was and everything. You could see that he was mad. But it's not very often that it happened. But when he felt there was an injustice made, he would tolerate for a while. But after that, he would just get really mad.
Yeah. Well, everybody has their limits, right?
Yes.
So to wrap up, Suzanne, from you, what would you say is an important lesson about engineering or being an engineer that you learned from Ralph Peck?
For me, because again, we were consultants, was the importance of engineering judgment and the inevitability that you have to use it because we never have enough data. And naturally, to build that judgment, you have to have experience. And in fact, that's the story of our profession in geotechnical engineering. You only get better by working more years. And I guess that's why I don't retire. He respected engineering judgment as far as you had enough experience to exercise it. But he was a strong believer, and I am too, because we have so many uncertainties in all the work we do.
Yeah. So a good reminder for everybody to make sure they're going out and getting that real experience and compounding it over time. Well, that brings us to just about 3 o'clock, and I want to thank everybody for all your candid responses to my questions and all the inside information about Ralph Peck. That was really fun, and I hope that all the listeners got something out of it too and learned something, and I look forward to doing another Ralph Peck focused live session in June, so stay tuned for that. But thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, guys.
Thanks.
See you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Mary nailed it. There is another one of these coming up in June. We are putting together the second panel. Please be on the lookout for that. We'll be focused more on Peck's legacy. I wanted to share, I didn't do it at the beginning. We have all these great pictures of Ralph Peck from over the years. Many of them came from one of the panelists who will remain nameless, whose name rhymes with like Suzanne Lacasse, maybe. But this is my all-time favorite. And it's of the two of you, Suzanne. And you said this was in Calgary. When was it taken?
It was the Canadian Geotechnical Conference in Calgary. That probably was, 2020. So it was.
So it would have been about 2001 or 2002, probably.
Yeah, I think it was in 2002. Yeah, because it comes back in Calgary every 10 years, and it was in Calgary in 2022. So it must have been 2002. Yeah.
That is a fantastic one, and we will link. We've got all these great photos, and a lot of them are up on the geoengineer.org website. We will link to the photo gallery that Dimitrios Zekos has put together of Ralph Peck up there, and many of the people who worked around Peck. I want to thank our panelists for being with us today. I typed to the rest of the GI team while we were doing this. I can't believe we've never done anything like this before. This was really a lot of fun. So I want to thank all of you for sharing your memories and just bringing all this to the people of GI, both to those watching it live, and people will go back and watch the recording later. So we really do appreciate it. Our next live stream is in 2 weeks, I believe. It's Tuesday, June 10th. We'll be coming to you live from Phoenix for the 2025 Monosmith Lecture. That'll be given by Claudia Zapata of Arizona State University. If you can't be at the Pavements Conference with us in person, it can be like you are, maybe without the heat. You can enjoy it from the comfort of your own home.
Or the beach.
Or the beach, you could, yeah, find some sandy soil, as it were, and just enjoy the day. And you can see the lecture thanks to GI. So thanks again for our panelists. You guys did a great job. It was great having all of you together in one space. Mary Nodine, fantastic job conducting the interview as always. And our producer today was Aurora Flieger. And we will see all of you very soon with another Geo-Institute live stream.